I'm not worth much, but I'll spread my legs for a roof over my head,
she said to the lone cowboy. The sun was beginning to sink behind the distant hills, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and red.
Dust rose slowly from the dry land as a lone figure walked along the cracked dirt path, each step heavy and careful. She was a young woman, not more than 25, with clothes that had grown thin and faded from the harsh sun and endless walking. Her hair was tangled, her shoes worn out, and her face held a mix of exhaustion and determination. Life had not been kind to her. She had walked for miles that day, hoping to find shelter, food, or even just someone who would listen, but the world she moved through was empty. The fields were brown and dry. The few houses she saw were locked and quiet, and the towns were small and distant. She had grown used to walking alone. For months now, she had moved from place to place, always trying to stay out of trouble, always hoping to find a safe spot to rest. Life had taken everything from her. Her home, her family, her sense of safety, and left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the faint hope that somewhere, somehow, there might be a place where she could belong. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but it was not just the physical hunger that bothered her. It was the hunger for kindness, for understanding, for even a single gesture that would remind her she was still human and still mattered. As the woman walked, she came to a narrow trail that led into a small valley. At the bottom of the valley, she noticed a wooden cabin, weathered by time and the sun, sitting quietly among a few scrubby trees. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney, and the faint sound of a wind chime moved gently in the breeze. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure if she should approach. Breaths. She had learned the hard way that strangers could be dangerous, that trust was a luxury she could rarely afford.
But the cabin promised something different.
It offered shade from the setting sun, a break from the endless journey, and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance to rest. The woman made her way down the trail slowly, each step careful, her eyes scanning the surroundings. Narration. As she reached the small clearing, she saw a man sitting on the porch of the cabin. He was tall and lean, with a wide-brimmed hat shading his face. His clothes were simple and dusty, like someone who spent most of his life outdoors. He held a cup of coffee in his hand and watched the sun dip below the horizon. His posture relaxed, but alert. There was something about him, quiet, still, and watchful, that made her pause. She had encountered many people before, some kind, some cruel, and she could sense almost immediately which type he might be. The woman approached slowly, not wanting to startle him.
"Excuse me,"
she said softly, her voice barely louder than the wind. I am looking for a place to stay for the night." The man turned his head slightly and looked at her, his eyes calm and steady. He did not speak at first, simply observing her as if trying to understand her story before judging it. She felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. She had never asked for help so directly before. Most of the time she had tried to rely on herself, but tonight something inside her urged her to speak up. I have nowhere to go," she continued, her voice trembling slightly.
"I've been walking for days, and I just need a roof over my head."
She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. She felt embarrassed and small, as if admitting her need made her weak. She had spent so long hiding, pretending she could manage on her own, that this confession felt almost impossible. The man said nothing for a long moment. The wind moved the dry leaves around the porch, and the smoke from the chimney twisted lazily into the sky. Finally he spoke, his voice low but steady. "You can rest here tonight," he said simply. There was no judgment in his tone, no expectation, only a calm acceptance. Relief washed over her, though she tried not to show it too clearly. She nodded quickly, her lips pressed together. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping closer to the cabin. She did not ask for anything else, for she had learned that it was better not to make demands, better to be grateful for even the smallest kindness. The man stood and opened the door to the cabin, motioning for her to enter. Inside, the room was simple but clean. A small bed sat against the wall, a wooden table in the center, and a few shelves held dishes and supplies. The smell of fresh bread and herbs lingered faintly in the air, giving the room a comforting warmth. She felt a little unsteady on her feet as she stepped inside, as though entering this space marked a new chapter, however small, in her life.
"You can sit," the man said, gesturing toward a chair by the table.
He poured some coffee into a cup and offered it to her. She accepted it with trembling hands, grateful for the warmth and the small sense of comfort it brought. She took a small sip, letting the liquid calm her nerves, and then looked around the room. For the first time in a long while, she felt a faint flicker of hope that perhaps things could be different, that perhaps she could find a place where she was safe.
I don't usually ask for help, she admitted quietly. I've had to take care of myself for a long time.
It's hard to trust people, Bray. The man nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "I know what it's like to be alone," he said. "Sometimes it's easier to handle the world on your own, but sometimes it helps to have someone else around." They sat in silence for a while, the sun finally disappearing behind the hills. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, and the world seemed to pause for a moment. The woman could feel the weight of her journey pressing down on her. But here, in this small cabin, it felt lighter, if only a little. She realized that safety was not just about walls and roofs, but about the presence of someone who would not harm her, someone who would let her be herself, even when she felt broken. As night fell, the man showed her to the bed. He did not speak much, only offering small gestures of guidance and care. She lay down, feeling the hard floor beneath the thin mattress, but also feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Security. Her body relaxed for the first time in days, and her mind, though still restless, allowed her a few moments of peace. The woman thought about her life as she drifted toward sleep. Days she had made mistakes, faced dangers, and survived hardships that would have broken many people. She had felt unworthy, invisible, and alone. But here, in this quiet cabin with the lone cowboy who offered her nothing more than a place to rest and a bit of understanding, she felt a spark of dignity returning. Perhaps her worth was not measured by her struggles, or by the cruel things life had forced upon her, but by her ability to keep moving forward, to keep seeking, to keep hoping. Outside, the night deepened. Stars sparkled above the valley, and the wind whispered through the trees. The woman closed her eyes and let herself breathe, letting the exhaustion wash over her, break. Tomorrow would bring another day of uncertainty, another day of challenges, but tonight she had a small victory. She had found shelter, warmth, and even a faint sense of human connection. And as she slept, the cowboy sat quietly by the fire, keeping watch. He understood more than he could say. He had seen people broken by life before, and he knew that offering shelter was more than an act of kindness. It was a chance for someone to reclaim themselves, to remember that even in the hardest times, there was still room for hope. The night passed slowly but peacefully. Outside, the world remained harsh and unforgiving, but inside the small cabin, two lives, both shaped by hardship, began a quiet journey toward understanding, trust, and perhaps a better tomorrow. Morning light slowly filtered through the small cabin's windows, painting the room in pale gold. The woman woke with a start, feeling the unfamiliar comfort of a bed beneath her. For the first time in weeks, she had slept through the night without fear or the need to run. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes and listening to the soft creaks of the cabin settling in the quiet morning. Outside, birds chirped lightly, and the wind moved through the trees, bringing the fresh scent of earth and grass. It was a small, ordinary morning, but to her it felt extraordinary. The cowboy was already awake. He sat quietly at the wooden table, drinking coffee and looking out the window at the valley beyond. He did not turn when she moved, but she could feel his presence. Steady, calm, and patient. She hesitated for a moment, unsure what to say or how to act. Perhaps she was used to being alone, used to the silence of the road, and yet now she found herself unsure how to interact with another person. She realized how rusty she was at simple conversation. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded without looking directly at her. "Morning," he said. His voice was calm, even, and carried no judgment, only quiet acknowledgement.
The woman cleared her throat. "Thank you for letting me stay here last night."
I don't know what I would have done otherwise. The cowboy finally looked at her. His eyes were steady, unshaken, as if he had seen much worse in his life.
"You don't need to thank me,"
he said. "Everyone deserves a place to rest, especially when the world has been hard on them." She nodded, unsure what else to say. The words, "everyone deserves a place to rest," felt strange and almost foreign to her. She had been surviving for so long that comfort had become a luxury, not a right. She drank some coffee to hide the lump in her throat, trying to steady the mix of relief and uncertainty that churned inside her. After a few minutes, the cowboy stood and walked to the small cupboard, taking out a loaf of bread and some cheese. He began to prepare a simple breakfast. The woman watched silently, unsure if she should help or simply wait. The man noticed her hesitation and gestured toward the table. "Breakfast will be ready soon." She hesitated, but then sat, watching him move with careful, practiced motions. He had a way of doing simple things that made them feel important, cutting the bread, arranging the cheese, making the small cabin feel alive and calm. For a long moment they both sat quietly, the only sounds being the rustling of utensils and the occasional bird outside. She noticed that he did not ask her anything personal, did not question her presence, and did not make her feel judged. There was a gentle patience about him, an understanding that words were not always necessary. After breakfast, the cowboy stepped outside to tend to the small chores around the cabin. He fed a few chickens, checked the water barrel, and swept the porch with slow, deliberate movements. The woman followed at a distance, curious about his work but unsure if she was allowed to help. Eventually, he glanced back at her and nodded. "You can help if you want," he said simply. "There's nothing complicated, just some small tasks."
Her hands had grown soft from months of not doing much more than walking and surviving, but she followed his instructions carefully.
She carried buckets of water, swept the floor, and fed the chickens, feeling the unfamiliar sense of accomplishment that came from completing small tasks.
Each action reminded her that she could still be useful, still capable of doing something right.
Power. The cowboy watched quietly, offering occasional guidance but never criticism, never impatience.
As the day passed, the woman began to notice more about him.
The way his hands moved with experience and care, the way his eyes scanned the horizon as if always aware of what lay ahead, and the way he seemed comfortable in his own silence. He had a presence that was strong but not imposing, quiet but not distant. She found herself relaxing, feeling safer than she had in months. For the first time, she realized that someone could be alone and still not be unkind.
She wanted to ask about his life, about why he lived so far from towns and people, but she hesitated. She had learned that people often held pain that they did not wish to share, and forcing questions sometimes caused more harm than good. Instead, she focused on the small moments, filling the water barrel, brushing the dust off the porch, and listening to the sounds of the valley.
The world outside might still be harsh and unforgiving, but here it felt a little gentler. A cowboy finally spoke in the late afternoon, his voice low but steady. "You're strong," he said, "not as a compliment, but as an observation. It takes strength to survive out there on your own, and even more to keep going when it feels like the world has forgotten you." She looked at him, surprised by his words. Few people had ever noticed her strength, and fewer still had acknowledged it without judgment. But she felt a flicker of warmth inside her chest, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, she still had value beyond survival.
I
didn't know I was strong," she admitted quietly. "Most days, I just feel tired. Tired and small. Like I don't matter." The man nodded slowly. "Feeling small doesn't make you small. You've made it this far on your own. That's more than many could do." The woman thought about his words, turning them over in her mind. She had survived months of hardship, walked endless miles, and faced dangers she dared not speak aloud. Breath. And she realized he was right. She had strength, even if she didn't always feel it. She also realized that strength did not always have to be shown in grand gestures. Sometimes it was simply surviving, moving forward and still hoping for better. As evening approached, the cowboy lit a small lantern in the cabin, the warm glow filling the space with a soft light. The woman sat quietly, reflecting on the day. Death she had helped with chores, eaten her first proper meal in days, and even felt safe enough to rest without fear. It was a small victory, but an important one. But she felt the beginnings of trust forming, slowly and carefully, like water carving a path through stone. The cowboy spoke again, this time in a quieter tone. Breaths. "Life can be hard, and sometimes it feels like no one cares. But there are moments, small ones, that remind us the world isn't all cruel, brave. Even a simple act, like letting someone rest, can matter more than we think."
She nodded, understanding.
She realized that kindness did not always come in grand gestures or dramatic events. Sometimes it was simply offering food, a place to sleep, or a quiet presence that made the world feel less lonely. For her, this cabin, this man, and this simple day were the first real taste of hope she had felt in a long time. As night fell, the wind moved gently through the trees, carrying with it the soft sounds of the valley. The woman felt a strange mix of exhaustion and peace. She had survived, yes, but she had also learned something new. That safety and care could exist even in the most unexpected places, and that trusting someone even consciously could bring comfort she had long forgotten. Before she went to sleep, she looked at the cowboy, who was already tending the small fire in the corner of the cabin. She wanted to ask more questions about him, about his life and why he lived alone. But she did not. Instead, she simply nodded silently to herself, realizing that she had been given a rare gift, a chance to breathe, to rest, and to feel human again.
And as she lay down, the woman understood something vital. Survival was important, but so was hope.
And in this quiet cabin, with the steady presence of the lone cowboy, she felt the first spark of both. The days at the small cabin began to take on a gentle rhythm. The woman woke each morning to the soft light of dawn spilling through the windows and the quiet presence of the cowboy, who already moved around the cabin as if he had done this every day for years. Their mornings were calm and steady. She helped fetch water, gathered eggs from the small flock of chickens, and swept the porch until it shone under the soft sunlight. Each task was simple, but it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. Realized that work, even the smallest kind, could bring a strange kind of joy and quiet pride. The cowboy watched her closely, but never intrusively. He offered guidance only when needed and never spoke with criticism. It was a new experience for her to be around someone who expected nothing of her except effort.
And even that effort was appreciated, not demanded.
She found herself relaxing, laughing quietly when a chicken pecked too close to her fingers, or when a bucket of water tipped slightly, splashing her boots. But she felt a small but profound happiness that had been missing from her life for a long time. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the hills, the woman paused while tending the garden near the cabin. The cowboy came over with a basket of harvested vegetables, setting it carefully on the table. He leaned against the wooden rail, watching her.
"You've learned quickly," he said. "Most people wouldn't be able to manage all this after just a few days." She shook her head, smiling faintly.
"I think I've had practice surviving on my own. This feels easier in comparison," she said. She paused, realizing how strange it felt to talk about herself without shame.
She had always hidden her past, always avoided telling anyone how difficult her life had been. But here, with someone who did not judge her, she felt safer. The cowboy nodded, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "It doesn't matter what you've done before. What matters is what you do now. And right now, you're doing fine." Her heart warmed at the words, though she barely admitted it. She had spent so long believing she had little value, that her only skill was surviving hardship. But his words reminded her that surviving was not weakness, it was strength. And she was beginning to feel that she might be more than her past, that she could be more than the lonely, desperate figure who had arrived at the cabin only a week ago. Over the following days, small routines formed between them. They worked together quietly in the mornings, shared meals at the wooden table, and sometimes simply sat outside watching the sun move across the valley. The cowboy rarely spoke about himself, but little pieces of his life came through in the simplest observations.
He had lived alone for many years, he explained, not out of anger at the world, but because solitude had become a shield.
Life had given him wounds, too, he said once quietly, and he had chosen to protect himself by being alone. The woman listened carefully, sensing a shared understanding between them. Though their experiences were different, both had faced hardship and loneliness. Both had learned to rely on themselves. There was a quiet respect growing between them, a bond that did not need words to exist. Brett. She began to feel trust, slowly and carefully, like water seeping into dry soil. Trust was foreign to her, but she realized it could exist even after months or years of fear and self-protection. One evening, after the chores were done and the sun had disappeared behind the hills, the woman found herself sitting by the fire inside the cabin. The cowboy was nearby, tending the small flame, and she felt an urge to speak, though she did not know how to begin.
First, I never thought I could feel safe again, she admitted quietly, staring into the warm glow of the fire. I've been running for so long, I
thought there was no place for me. The cowboy looked at her, his face calm but his eyes steady.
"Safety isn't about walls or locks," he said. "It's about knowing someone won't harm you. About knowing someone will give you a chance, even when the world has been cruel." She nodded slowly, feeling the truth of his words sink into her heart. For months she had believed she was alone in the world, that no one could ever care or understand her.
But yet here was someone who not only offered her shelter, but also treated her as a person, not a burden, not a problem, not a mistake.
She realized that kindness could exist even in unexpected places, and that trust could grow, even from the smallest gestures. Over the next few days, the woman grew more confident. She handled chores on her own, tended the garden, and even began cooking simple meals.
The cowboy observed quietly, offering guidance when needed, but mostly allowing her the space to learn and grow.
She felt pride in her accomplishments, a pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion and everything to do with her own effort and resilience.
Base.
One afternoon, a small accident occurred. She dropped a basket of vegetables, and they tumbled to the ground with a loud clatter. Her first instinct was to panic, to apologize, and perhaps to shrink into herself, expecting the cowboy to be angry, but he simply came over, helping her gather the vegetables.
"It's fine," he said calmly. "Mistakes happen."
"The important part is that you keep trying." The woman felt a rush of relief and gratitude.
It was such a simple act, yet it carried a weight she could not describe. No one had ever responded to her mistakes with patience before. No one had ever treated her as if she could learn and grow, as if she had worth, even when she stumbled. She realized that this simple presence, this steady calm, was changing her. She was beginning to see herself differently, not as someone who had nothing, but as someone who could do, who could be. As the days turned into weeks, a subtle companionship developed between them. They did not speak constantly, but their silence was comfortable rather than awkward. They shared meals, chores, and quiet moments by the fire. The woman noticed the cowboy's small habits, the way he paused to listen to the wind, the careful attention he gave to the animals, the quiet moments when he seemed lost in thought.
She came to respect not only his experience, but also his patience, his ability to endure solitude without bitterness. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the woman and the cowboy sat outside on the porch.
She had just finished tending the garden, and he was quietly sharpening a knife for chores.
Breath. She watched him for a moment, noticing how calm and steady he seemed. Finally, she spoke.
"Why do you live so far from everyone?" she asked softly. "I mean,
Why do you stay alone?" The cowboy paused, considering her question. He did not speak immediately. When he finally answered, his voice was quiet and thoughtful. "I have my reasons," he said.
Life has given me pain, and I chose to protect myself by staying apart. But it's not always easy.
Narration.
Loneliness can be heavy, even when you think you're used to it. The woman nodded, sensing a shared understanding.
She too had chosen to move alone for months, relying only on herself. She realized that, despite their differences, both of them had built walls to protect themselves, and both were slowly learning that trust, even in small measures, could be life-changing.
That night, as they sat quietly by the fire, the woman felt a sense of peace she had not known in a long time.
Breath. She realized that survival was not only about avoiding danger, finding food, or walking miles. Sometimes survival was about finding someone who would see you as human, someone who would offer patience, respect, and quiet companionship.
The cowboy spoke once more before they went to sleep. "You've come a long way," he said.
"Not just physically, but here," he added, placing a hand lightly on his chest.
"You're stronger than you think."
"And you're not alone anymore."
The woman smiled faintly, feeling warmth in her chest. She understood what he meant.
Her journey had been long and difficult, but here, in this quiet cabin, she had found something she had thought impossible: hope. She had found someone who would not judge her, who would not take advantage of her, and who would simply allow her to be. And as she lay down that night, listening to the soft sounds of the valley, she realized that she was beginning to heal. Not completely, not instantly, but slowly, one day at a time, one small act of trust, one quiet moment of companionship at a time. She understood that life would still be hard, that challenges would come, but she was no longer facing them entirely alone.
And that realization gave her a strength deeper than anything she had known before. The morning sun broke gently over the horizon, spilling golden light across the valley.
The woman woke slowly, feeling a strange mix of familiarity and possibility. The cabin no longer felt like just a temporary refuge. It had become a place where she could breathe, a place where she could think without the constant weight of fear pressing down on her. The cowboy was already awake, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, as calm and steady as ever. She watched him for a moment, realizing how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. Brit. She rose quietly, letting him enjoy his morning routine, and stepped outside. The air was fresh and cool, filled with the scent of grass, earth, and the faint smoke of the cabin's chimney. The valley looked alive, vibrant, and almost welcoming. For the first time in a long while, she felt she belonged somewhere. She had worked for this sense of security, but it had come not from her own effort alone, but also from the quiet patience and understanding of someone who had offered her shelter without expecting anything in return. The cowboy finally joined her outside, carrying a small basket of breakfast items. "Good morning," he said simply, handing her a piece of bread and some cheese. She accepted it with a smile, feeling the warmth of the sun and the quiet connection between them. They ate together in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, not the lonely, tense silence she had known for so long. The woman realized that she had come to treasure these small moments. Sharing a meal, tending the garden, simply sitting in the presence of someone who would not harm her. She had never thought such simple things could feel like gifts, but now they did. After breakfast, the cowboy spoke, his voice calm but intentional. "I think it's time we talk," he said. "You've been here for a while, learning, working, resting. And I've seen how much you've grown. You're stronger than you realize. You've earned a choice." The woman looked at him, curiosity and caution mixing in her eyes. "A choice?" she asked softly. "You can stay here not because you owe me anything, not because I expect it, but because this can be a place for you, a place where you're safe, where you're respected, and where you can rebuild. Or you can leave, babe. It's your decision." She felt a wave of emotion she had not expected. For months, perhaps years, she had felt like she had no choices. She had lived day to day, moving from place to place, always at the mercy of circumstances, always waiting for the next danger, the next rejection. And now, for the first time, someone was telling her that she had the power to decide for herself, that she had value, that she was more than her hardships. She thought of the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the long walks, the nights spent alone under stars that felt distant and cold, the hunger, the fear, and the endless uncertainty. Then she thought of the small cabin, the valley, and the cowboy who had offered her nothing but understanding and patience. She realized that this place and this person had given her something far more important than food or shelter. They had given her dignity. The woman took a deep breath and spoke slowly, her voice firm but gentle. I want to stay, not because I can't survive elsewhere, but because here I feel human again. I feel inspiration. The cowboy nodded, a small smile touching his lips. Inspiration. Then stay, he said. You don't need to justify it. Bias. This is your home now, if you choose it. Over the following weeks, the woman settled into the cabin in a way that felt natural and right. She continued her work around the property, tending the garden, feeding the animals, and helping with chores. But now she did it not out of necessity or survival, but out of choice and pride. She felt a growing sense of accomplishment in every task, a reminder that her efforts had meaning. She had not just survived, she had begun to thrive. The cowboy continued his quiet presence beside her, guiding when necessary, but mostly giving her space to grow. He shared stories of his past, of mistakes and lessons learned, of loneliness endured and the small joys he had found in life. She listened,
understanding that even people who seemed strong and steady carried burdens, and that trust and companionship could heal old wounds as well. Together they worked as a quiet team. They laughed occasionally, shared meals, and spoke openly about small matters, always respecting boundaries. The woman discovered new confidence in herself, realizing that she was capable of learning, contributing, and even caring for someone else without losing herself. She had once believed that her worth was tied only to her ability to survive. But now she understood that her value was inherent. It existed simply because she was human, because she deserved respect and kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the valley in pink and gold, the woman sat on the porch, watching the light fade. The cowboy joined her, and they sat together in companionable silence. For a long moment, neither spoke, both simply enjoying the quiet and the beauty of the world around them. Finally, the woman turned to him. "I never thought I could feel like this,"
she admitted. Safe.
Respected, like I belong somewhere. I thought I was too broken, too small, but I was wrong. The cowboy looked at her steadily. "You are never too broken," he said. "You've been through much, yes, but you're strong, and you've proven that every day. You've earned this peace, this safety, this choice. And you've earned the right to see yourself the way I see you." Her heart warmed at his words. Break. She realized that the journey that had brought her here, though painful and difficult, was not wasted. Every hardship, every lonely night, every challenge had shaped her into someone capable of appreciating this new life, of understanding that safety, dignity, and respect were not luxuries but essentials she deserved. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The woman grew more confident, her movements around the cabin steady and assured. She no longer flinched at unexpected sounds, no longer doubted her ability to handle challenges. But she had found a rhythm in life, a quiet peace that came not from escaping hardship but from facing it, surviving it, and choosing to embrace kindness when it was offered. The cowboy and the woman developed a quiet, steady companionship, one built on trust, respect, and shared understanding. They did not need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Each small act of care, each shared meal, each moment of silent understanding strengthened the bond between them. She realized that connection was not about dependence, but about mutual respect and the willingness to be present for one another. One morning, as the first light of dawn touched the valley, the woman stood on the porch and looked out over the hills. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the long miles she had walked, the nights spent in fear, and the constant struggle to survive. She thought about the choice she had made, to stay, to accept the quiet kindness of the cowboy, and to allow herself to heal. She realized that she had grown in ways she could not have imagined. Her thoughts turned to the future. She understood that life would still bring challenges, but she also knew she was no longer facing them alone. She had found a place where she could live with dignity, safety, and respect. She had discovered her own strength, her ability to trust, and her right to be seen as human. And she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with courage, not desperation. The cowboy joined her silently, handing her a cup of coffee. They watched the sun rise together, side by side, without the need for words. In that quiet moment, the woman felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. She had survived hardship, found trust and companionship, and reclaimed her dignity. But she understood that true shelter was not only a roof over one's head, but also the safety, respect, and acceptance that came from being seen and valued as a human being. And in that small cabin surrounded by the valley, with the steady presence of the cowboy beside her, she finally understood that she had found a home, not just a physical place, but a place in the world where she belonged.
Her journey of survival had transformed into a journey of healing, trust, and quiet strength. The sun climbed higher, the wind whispered through the trees, and life continued in its steady rhythm. Embarrassed, she smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of the day and the steady presence beside her. She knew that hardships might still come, but she had discovered something far more enduring: the strength to face them, the ability to trust again, and the knowledge that she had worth simply because she existed. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole.